the doc, he says, now bend over, son. We're gonna check your prostate. Baby, the fun's just begun. Now you got the right to sing them old man blues. Gosh, you got big fingers now.
Welcome back to Geezerology, everybody. Today we're going to continue with Bill's series, Small Labels, Big Noise. And today he's going to talk about a label called Factory Records out of the UK that was in business from 1978 until 1992, according to the info I have. It's been defunct since then. It's not a label that's been recreated, but there was a pretty good story behind this record label, and it was a little more than a record label. But Bill wants to tell you about it.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, Factory Records, one of the most important labels, especially given the dynamics of the late 70s and 80s into the 90s in the UK, and then globally because of its influence. It was a kind of a happenstance situation. So let me talk a little bit about where and when this kind of came about. So Manchester is probably considered the second city in the UK or in England after London. And it's in the north of the country. And it's, if you have a familiarity with the north-south divide, it's one of those things where there's a certain degree of enviousness between the Northerners with the attention that comes from the South and the whole kind of London media-centric complex that puts out the music and the TV and the movies and that sorts of things. In the 70s, it was no different. But of course, given the fact that there was no internet and all of the other dynamics that exist today were not present, a lot of things traveled a bit slower. So in the late 70s, when punk was gestating, and it was kind of happening in different parts of the world, but in England, it was essentially centered in London. The Sex Pistols had formed and had started to do some intermittent touring, which caused chaos everywhere. In 1976, they played in Manchester at one of the most famous shows, I guess you could categorize this in rock and roll history. This is kind of like, Paul McCartney and John Lennon meeting at the church fete. This is in Manchester in 76. About 40 people show up to this show that's put on by Howard Devoto and Pete Shelley, who later formed the Buzzcocks. And the Pistols, of course, are the main draw. The people who come to see them are many and varied. But among the 40, you've got Mark E. Smith, who actually forms the Fall later on. You've got Morrissey, Stephen Morrissey, who's the driving force behind the Smiths, and a couple of guys, well, actually three guys, Ian, Bernard, and Peter, who are so impressed that they form a band called Stiff Kittens, which becomes Warsaw, which becomes Joy Division. Another guy who's there is Tony Wilson. And Tony Wilson is there because he is a media guy. He is a TV presenter and newscaster for Granada Television, based in Manchester. And he has a particular interest in, cultural and artistic happenings. And because he's so impressed by what he's seen, he's incorporated the Sex Pistols in his little show that he's got called Get Closer, I think, something like that. It's a kind of a little cultural snapshot that runs in 76 and 77. And the enthusiasm that he is seeing here is something that gets him really riled up, and he wants to take part in this. So he's got, some media savvy based on his career, and he also has some friends that he ropes into this notion of kind of putting together their own shows. So hosting a show at a place, a club that they'll call the, factory shows, based on Manchester being an old factory town, the, first industrialized city that's now kind of collapsing on itself. The people that he gathers in as the founders of this kind of factory movement are Peter Seville, who goes on to become kind of the house designer and a very influential designer indeed, both for Factory Records and in general. Martin Hannett is the producer who becomes the house producer who gives a certain sound to all of the artists that become part of Factory Records. And then Alan Erasmus, who is a local actor, well-known and well-regarded in the English acting scene. And then Rob Gretton, who happens to be the manager of Joy Division. So all of these people come together, they start realizing that more than putting shows on, they can perhaps produce things. And Factory Records is the umbrella with which they will do that. And over the course of the next few years, Factory will put out some of the most interesting punk and post-punk material going anywhere in the world. So Joy Division, of course, is massively influential. And after Ian Curtis's suicide, New Order, which comes out of Joy Division, becomes even more popular because of their approach to taking the Joy Division sound and mutating it in their own kind of more commercial dance-oriented way. And then other bands like A Certain Ratio, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, Cabaret Voltaire, these are all bands that really have a sound that is a mix of post-punk, electronic, synth-driven, very moody, representative, I think, of what Manchester is and its cultural environment. And Tony Wilson is kind of the driver behind everything that happens with those bands, but also with the scene in general. So Factory becomes kind of a linchpin in Manchester's evolution. And over the course of the time that Scott mentions, before the band, or before the label becomes defunct, which interestingly enough is the result of almost too much success. They host big events. They are known for drawing people in to things that involve film and literature. They have other kind of cultural shows that are put on, and then their hallmark cultural embodiment is the Hacienda, which is a nightclub that both Factory and New Order kind of co-fund. And for the most part, it's it hosts live bands, and then evolves into a place where influential DJs, kind of form what becomes acid house, a genre of music which is, you take disco and then you really fully mechanize it, if you can imagine that. So highly beat driven, very propulsive, and quite interesting. So this is, kind of the late 80s into the 90s, where the post-punk threads kind of develop into what becomes known as Manchester. Manchester is acid house plus indie pop plus kind of 60s throwback sound, some funk, all kinds of crazy stuff. Happy Mondays, which is one of the big bands to come out of that movement, is a Factory label artist, a group of artists. And they're very successful, but they're so successful and they're so drug fueled that they essentially bankrupt the label, after some limited failures to kind of come up with follow-ups to their big successful first two records. They end up, spending almost all of the money on drugs and other kinds of things. It's a kind of a long, tangled story that doesn't really merit investigation, except to say that it contributes to Factory's downfall. So the Hacienda, nobody's buying drinks anymore at the Hacienda because they're all taking ecstasy, because it's that's the whole thing that's going on in at this time in the late 80s and early 90s. So in the end, the label kind of folds. It's sold to I think London Records. Tony Wilson. Unfortunately, a few of these guys, Tony dies of cancer. Martin Hannett dies. I think he also had cancer. The problem is that, we talked about stiff records before. It's like you've got these guys who have these great creative impulses. They have a certain degree of business savvy, but not enough. The success kind of goes wildly out of control. And I mean, I guess if we cite the Beatles as kind of the exemplars of almost everything that has been done in the past, Apple Records is a great example, because this is very similar to this. It's more than just a record label. It's kind of conceptual art as a record label. And one of the defining things of Factory is that almost everything was numbered. So everything that was issued was under FAC, FAC, and 1 through, I don't know, 500 and something. Included in that list are things like the Hacienda's house cat, the kitty cat, who was named Feline Groovy. Feline Groovy is actually, she has a fact number, and Tony Wilson's casket has a fact number too. So almost everything is on the list. Tony was, he was an interesting guy. I mean, he kind of divisive in some ways, because people considered him sort of like the man, he's representing the man, except his contract agreements with his artists were that the artist owns everything, the company owns nothing, and that the artist can leave and fuck off if they want to. I mean, this is the language inserted in the contracts, which was really kind of a great way to approach things, except when it came time to try to sell the label to get out of this impending bankruptcy. London Records realizes they don't have control of New Order and all of the bands on the roster, because the contracts don't really apply that way. I mean, it was more about, what can we do collectively? It's a handshake kind of business, the way they were approaching it. And it was great while it lasted. And like every good thing in life, it doesn't last very long. And the good thing about all of that effort is that the records are still there. So the design work, the sounds, the influence, quite profound. And I think that the best thing about Tony Wilson's legacy, I mean, it's kind of summed up in 2 or 3 words on his headstone. It says, Anthony H. Wilson, broadcaster, cultural catalyst. And that's pretty good. I guess if you have those things on your tombstone, that's a pretty good way to go. So anyway, Factory Records, very important. Listen up.
Yeah, I was pretty fascinated by the structure of this company as I was reading it. Yeah, like you say, their discography. I went and looked at their discography, and that's where you see their discography is, with all the catalog numbers and everything like that. And their discography, like you say, it includes posters, it includes the guy's cat, it includes the guy's coffin. I noticed that one thing in there was a brief that was filed during a lawsuit. Well, that's part of their discography.
Yeah, it was actually one of the partners, Martin Hannett, the producer, wanted to, either get fully bought out, or he had a lawsuit, and it was one of the things that there's a actual document that they put as part of the element of the business. Yeah.
So yes, but I do get the sense that this as a company, this is more of a I don't know, it's more of an art project than really a company, right? Right. I mean, the company had a lot of ideas and a lot of trinkets, but not a whole lot of assets when they went to try to sell it, right? Because of that philosophy they had and their approach to doing this. Yeah, it was basically a vehicle for their artistic endeavors. I do also notice that the one founder, Alan Erasmus, he's apparently still around, and he's apparently become quite the humanitarian, because he's now in the middle of he's going back and forth and doing humanitarian missions to Ukraine right now. I just saw. So anyway, I just wanted to add that in, well, thanks, Bill. you're educating me on some of these small labels from back in the days, and educating our audience, and I find it pretty interesting to hear these things. So I appreciate that, and we're looking forward to the next one. So hit that subscribe button, everybody, so you see when the next one comes around, and we will see you soon. So long.
Well, put down your playboy, put on some hush puppy shoes. Let's play it one time. Woo!